Good morning, everyone. I'm excited to be back here again today. Welcome to you all to the Finding North Network Perspectives 2024 E-Symposium Day 2. For those of you who didn't attend yesterday's session, my name is Tess Moodie, my pronouns are they, them, and I'm excited to be here with you again on Day 2 to offer an acknowledgement of country again and have another yarn as a First Nations person with lived experience. I have lived experience including mental illness, disability, and being a victim survivor of domestic, family and sexual violence. Thank you to the Finding North Network for the opportunity to come back again today. I'm a proud Palawa and sovereign woman who is queer, disabled and neurodivergent, and I'm coming to you today from the lands of the Pirapa people in the northwest of Lutruwita, also called Tasmania. The photo that you see in my background, this is a powerful piece of art used with permission, created by a First Nations artist called Charlotte Allingham. Please go and check out her other amazing creations via her Instagram page. She also has a website. As we gather today on different lands, I just would like to begin by paying my respects to the traditional custodians of the land on which I'm present today and wherever you are coming from today. Across this continent, there are hundreds of nations, tribes and clans that have existed here for over 65,000 years. The First Nations people are the oldest culture in the world, and we are the most diverse, unique and sustainable people on the planet. I'd like to invite you to take a moment to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands of wherever you're coming from today, for they hold the memories, traditions and hopes of the First Nations people of Australia. Feel free to share the lands you're on by typing in the chat box. We remember our ancestors of the past and the elders who are present with us. Their stories and knowledge will be passed on for generations to come. My people have always listened and learnt from each other, the environment, the elements, the animals, the seasons, and our ancestors. We don't live separate to body, culture, spirit, land and water because we're one with it. The continuing connection to land forms part of an important part of who we are. I would like to pay my respects to the elders past, present and future, for without the knowledge that the elders passed to their own, the country that we live on just wouldn't be the same. We appreciate their care and connection to this land. They have cared for country for thousands of generations, and I'm deeply grateful for their ongoing care. Please always remember that wherever you're standing today, you are standing on sacred grounds. The boundaries of traditional owners are not defined by documents or the hand or the pen, but through the natural landscapes of our incredible Mother Earth. And whenever you travel across this beautiful continent of ours, you are entering the land of a nation, a tribe and a clan, and a land that extends far beyond white constructs of white land ownership. Across this beautiful continent of ours, we represent hundreds of First Nations mobs that have existed for many years. As we all join together online, let us all remember and acknowledge the many warriors that created the pathways for us, the ones recognised and the ones we've never heard of and the ones still emerging. We have some powerful, brilliant First Nations advocates and activists who are bringing great change one step at a time, and I know that some of you are here today. I'd also like to acknowledge other First Nations people who might be attending the conference today. We've always listened and learned from each other, the environment, the animals, elements and ancestors. We must commit to making our world and our society more inclusive, breaking through barriers, not creating them. For all of us together can bring about positive changes for future generations by starting with healing for past generations. I would also like to acknowledge those who have advocated and continue to advocate in the mental health space. Without the pioneers who stepped up many decades ago and the work that you all do in current time, we would never have made it where we are today. I would also like to acknowledge and remember those who haven't made it to today, those who have lost their lives to suicide, harm or abuse in institutions, neglect in systems that weren't made for them, or isolation in a society that has been ignorant or unwilling to understand mental illness or make it safe for us to reach out for help. I myself have lost 2 people close to me due to suicide in the past 3 months, and I also would like to just remember them today myself. Before we launch into today's speakers, including my own presentation later in the day about ethical engagement with lived experience, I would like to yarn a bit about intersectionality, particularly from a First Nations perspective. Some of you may have heard of intersectionality before, but some of you haven't, so I'll just give a little explanation of what that is. Intersectionality refers to the ways in which different aspects of a person's identity can expose them to overlapping forms of discrimination and marginalisation. This can include things such as social characteristics such as race, gender, sexual orientation, refugee or migrant status, religion, disability, age, mental health, housing status, socioeconomic status, criminal history or sex worker status, and more. Attitudes, systems and structures in our society and organisations can interact to create inequality and result in exclusion. These include racism, ableism, sexism, homophobia, transphobia, biphobia, ageism, or stigma surrounding substance use or mental health. When these aspects or characteristics combine, there's a greater risk of people experiencing marginalisation, oppression, discrimination, and violence. People can find it harder to get the help that they need due to systemic barriers, and there's an increased risk of social isolation. And obviously, intersectionality can feed into a driver of mental illness as well. For First Nations people, the combination of racism and ableism, along with other parts of our identity as First Nations people who experience mental illness or domestic, family and sexual violence, can create significant barriers to us being diagnosed, treated and supported properly, and often these impacts are intergenerational. It's important to know intersectionality doesn't only affect First Nations people, but it affects everybody. A number of other factors that may create barriers for First Nations people who experience mental illness are previous negative experiences of discrimination from government services, both mainstream and mental health support related, lack of cultural safety when dealing with professionals who are not familiar with cultural customs or practices, fear that coming forward about mental illness may trigger a report to child safety. This is so huge for our women. The reality is that our women experience child removal at a much, much higher rate than non-Aboriginal women. The lack of service provision in rural and remote communities and lack of awareness of how to access that support. A good example of that is I live in a small town in the far northwest of Tasmania, 8,500 people. We do not have one resident psychologist, physiotherapist, occupational therapist, psychiatrist. Also, another factor is misdiagnosis or misdiagnoses due to assessment tools being very white-centric or developed on research about white people. Also, they can lack cultural sensitivity or understanding of our different ways of communicating. For example, we can be very blunt and straight up, and sometimes that can come across as being rude or aggressive, and that can create a huge barrier for us. All of these factors create inequity, which means that First Nations people who experience mental illness might experience poorer long-term outcomes as compared with white Australians. One way to mitigate this is organisations need to know when working with First Nations people It is important to always be guided by the person to inform your understanding of their condition and what they need. This is really basic person-centred practice, but it must go deeper than that culturally. We are the experts on our own lives. We know this, but people don't always listen to this. We're experts on what we need to thrive and what hasn't worked for us in the past. By using an invitational, yarning and deep listening approach, services can ensure that First Nations people are supported in the best way possible to achieve best long-term outcomes. And that yarning, deep listening approach, that can be used with anybody, not just First Nations people. As part of understanding the interface between mental illness and First Nations cultures, there must be an understanding of broader concepts of culture and the histories and lived experience we have. Key to beginning this understanding for organisations or people that give us support is them doing cultural sensitivity training, preferably delivered by an Aboriginal organisation with lived experience, building and maintaining relationships with local Aboriginal mobs or organisations to ensure they have contemporary insights of our challenges. Last but not least, having a yarn with us. Talk to us, ask us, listen, embed it deeply in your practice, policies, responses and prevention initiatives. It's this last point that is the most relevant for us here today. Embedding lived experience is the most powerful way we can ensure we are acting in culturally sensitive and trauma-informed and person-centred ways. Many of us have had so much power taken away from us in services, systems, relationships, the justice system, by police, and the overarching big one, colonisation. Engaging in lived experience advocacy helps us to restore our sense of power, belonging, and value that we matter as humans. Humans that have been through so much, right? And often in silence, and sometimes we only speak out about it when we hit crisis with mental health. Still, some never do speak out, and sadly it's too painful for them to continue living. As you listen to the speakers today, I ask that you not only deep listen, but deep commit. This includes to committing to ensuring your practice is culturally informed and has an intersectional lens if you're someone that's working in an organisation or in the sector. I believe that with this commitment, improving health and wellbeing outcomes for First Nations people can be done, and the gap between us and non-First Nations people can be closed just that little bit more. Everyone has a right to safety, right to education, a right to financial security and a right to wellbeing, and these are basic human rights that we all should have. This truth must be told, but importantly it must be heard if we are to walk together to address the rights for people with mental illness. As you connect, learn and share today and tomorrow and beyond, please remain committed to a legacy of what should be done to address the stigma, discrimination, exclusion, abuse and neglect of people with mental illness so that we can move forward with support, healing, recognition and dignity. By organisations and institutions making a commitment to embedding lived experience to not only just inform their work, but more authentically and ethically co-develop programs and supports, they can ensure that we can live our lives more wholly and care is customised to be fit for purpose. This will ensure that First Nations people, but all people regardless of race, can not only survive but thrive. Thank you for being here today and for your commitment to listening to lived experience. It's not only lived experience, but it is lived expertise. And it's no longer acceptable that anything is done to us or for us without us. To finish up, I'd like to share a poem with you by a great Black feminist, Maya Angelou. I have a tattoo that reflects this little piece I'm going to read because I always draw on that whenever things get really tough for me. Still I rise, Just like the moons and like suns, with the certainty of tides, just like hope springing high, still I rise. Out of the huts of history's shame, I rise up from a past that's rooted in pain. I rise. I'm a black ocean, leaping and wide, welling and swelling, I bear in the tide. Leaving behind nights of terror and fear, I rise into a daybreak that's wondrously clear. I rise. Bringing the gifts that my ancestors gave, I am the dream and the hope of the slave. I rise, I rise, I rise. Last of all, I want to acknowledge that sovereignty has never been ceded. We must always remember that this land always was and always will be Aboriginal land. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much, Tess. I'm also a massive fan of Maya Angelou's quotes. Something that, just as a powerful woman and activist and poet, just so beautiful. Thank you so much for that beautiful acknowledgement of country, Tess. Appreciate you.
Thanks for watching Explore More Perspectives 2024 on Finding North Network's YouTube channel. Find out more by visiting findingnorthnetwork.com.au or email info@findingnorthnetwork.com.au.